So I've been playing a lot of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and I've got a bit of a rant in me, which is that, like, just to preface things, like, it's a well-made game. It's very compelling. It's beautiful. Its story is very interesting. There's a lot that has going for it. It's immediately iconic and memorable and interesting in a way that's like people are going to be remembering for a while. But while I'm playing through this game, I am frequently just like, what the fuck am I playing? And I want to analyze that a little bit because, like, it's a very strange game, and it interacts very strangely with player psychology. But I can only really talk about my own experience and that the way that I approach video games. And I know that not everyone approaches video games the same way, but I kind of approach games in a sort of a way where I kind of think that, like, optional content in games kind of isn't. If you think about it, like, if you buy a game, you're there to play the game. So you want to do all the stuff in the game, like, within reason. If there's like something really stupid somewhere, you might not want to do it. Like, sometimes you're playing like Skyward Sword and you find the bamboo chopping mini game and you get like a couple rewards from it, but they were like, but you could go for a really crazy number, and you're sitting there like waggling the Wiimote and you're like, I don't know how to make it chop faster, like, and make it read every swing I'm doing as a swing. And it's like, this isn't Zelda. This isn't why I'm playing this game. I'm gonna go back to doing dungeons. It's like, there's obviously like limits. There's certain things that you might not do in some games. But generally speaking, I approach things with the approach that, like, if you buy a game, your goal is to largely just do all the stuff in it. That's especially the stuff that's related to the type of content that the normal mainline stuff is. So, like, this is a JRPG. I'm just gonna call it that. We're not gonna discuss that. We're not gonna fight over that today. The discussion there, but it's a turn-based RPG. You have a party. You level up. You go fight the things in the dungeons. You beat the story bosses to progress, but also there's just a bunch of related bosses and content all over the world. And sometimes you do quests for individual NPCs where they ask you to do something and you go do something and you go come back and they're like, yeah, thanks. And that's like the core loop of most of the stuff. So with that lens, it's reasonable that you would just go fight whatever stuff happens to exist and go to whatever levels happen to exist. Like, there are players out there, I guess, who just mainline the story and ignore anything that they're not actively being told to do at any given moment, I guess. But I don't get those people, because like, if you're going to complain about how long games are and whether they're a value proposition or whatnot, you should probably do all the stuff in the game. There's just several zones the game never tells you to go to, but you can see them right there, so you should go do them and check them out. My issue with Clair Obscur is that its entire difficulty curve makes no sense to me, and I have no idea how any player is meant to navigate this game and have it make sense in their playthrough. I feel like almost everyone's playthroughs are not going to make sense, except, ironically, the people who do just mainline the story. Because, like, if you go anywhere in this game, the game's actually very tight and, like, feels very well designed and very, like, it's going to be perfectly tuned the whole time in the intro, right up until you get to the open world. The moment you set foot in a big green field, it's like, all bets are off. All bets are immediately off, because you don't know where to go or what order to do things in or what the reasonable way of approaching this kind of game is. And the game it doesn't really feel like it's necessarily tuned to help you with that either. It's like you will encounter things that are, like, shockingly difficult everywhere you go. And, like, the first time you see a chromatic enemy in the first dungeon, you're like, okay, it's called a special thing. It one-shots my party. That's interesting. But it's also like, it's a conquerable challenge. So it's like, okay, it's an optional challenge, but it's on the main path, just slightly off to the right. And then when you do it, it's like, you feel cool that you did the thing. So, like, the first chromatic enemy feels like it's a reasonable thing that's like, this is the bonus thing. You should do this. You should probably do it now even. Just, you know, it's signposted that this one's going to kick your ass a little bit, but it'll be fine. It's like the first chromatic enemy in this game feels like the bonus chest in a Zelda shrine. in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. For those that don't know, those games have like 100+ shrines in them, and when you complete them, you get a little thing that helps you increase your maximum health or stamina. But there's a little bonus chest in there somewhere, and it's usually a weird additional challenge that you're not reasonably going to be able to do at a glance. You have to really figure out, like, what's the trick here? But you're also not really meant to come back. Like, I don't think anyone's coming back to shrines to do the bonus chests they missed. They are marked to tell you which one you did and didn't get the chest for, but the chest isn't valuable, actually. It's just for the gratification of getting to do the bonus thing and feel like you really, like, double solved the level and did the optional bonus thing, and you get to feel cool for that purpose, basically. But they aren't, like, game-changing rewards. Those games are almost devoid of rewards, actually, because everything disintegrates in your hands. So in that sort of way, like when you fight like this mime we're looking at here, we're looking at like early game content because I don't want to show any spoilers. So this is just like a random dungeon that's in the first like fifth of the game or something. These mime guys you see also are like, just like, oh, that's weird. They've got a gimmick where they're really hard to hurt, but like, you can do it. You can get through it. So you fight your first mime, you fight your first chromatic enemy, and you're like, okay, the game has optional challenges, but like not like big deals. Like you can do them. They're just going to like actually ask you to like lock in. But you can do them as you approach them. Once you get to the open world, that goes out the window, and you have no idea when you should do most of these fights. And it kind of ties into a larger issue with the game. It's not necessarily inherently a bad thing, but it obscures things. The game doesn't really have traditional leveling in the normal sense. You do level up, and when you level up, you get 3 stat points and 1 skill point. But most of the skills you buy, you can't keep. By which I mean you can only have 6 skills equipped at a time, and you have a massive tree of buying like 30 skills. So hypothetically, you're buying upgrades with these skills. But you also just might be buying your way across a skill tree to get to something you want to equip and not equipping anything along the way. Everything that you do equip does remove a previous skill that you did have, which you also paid skill points for. And so do these skills come together in a synergy? Do they work together to make a series of abilities that you'll use in normal fights that are actually improving your performance? Or did you buy a new skill and now you're worse now because like you're actually like your action point economy is worse, or the elements don't line up with the kind of things you're dealing with, or most crucially, your skills don't bounce off of each other correctly because like the game is full of. I feel like the game is designed like a trading card game half the time, where every single skill has a really elaborate description of how it does this kind of attack, but it does the secondary effect, and it also does this like meta thing that's like going to affect your future turns. And almost every character has a thing that affects your decision making on future turns based on what skill you did last time. And that's really complicated because that means you have this engine you're building of how these things synergize and loop on each other. And if you do that wrong, your character's weaker. So leveling is not inherently making you stronger in this game outside of stat points, but stat points are actually relatively low value because the game hits you with Pictos and Lumina. And the Picto and Lumina system is the thing where you pick up skills off the floor or from bosses, and those skills can be memorized to give your characters permanent bonuses. But strangely, these items also have stats on them, and those stats are so high, especially early in the game, that like if you want defense or HP or crit, you'll get so much from the Lumina you potentially equip that it completely dwarfs what you actually have in skill points. So leveling is surprisingly low impact, which means that the game, and because these other systems are here that are leveling adjacent but aren't actually dependent on what level you are, because none of them are level locked, and they don't know which ones you have, they can't really estimate your power based on your level, because your level might have surprisingly little to do with the power of your character, given all these other things that are going on here. Especially with the really weird thing, which is that you can have Lumina points, which affects how many memorized skills you can equip on a character, but the majority of the points you get from that aren't from leveling, but from items you pick up on the ground that you spend on a character to give them Lumina. And your strategy there will massively change how the game plays, because you can put all of the Lumina into one character for example, and give them the ability to memorize every single skill in the game and be comically absurd, and even spec them to fight alone specifically and have bonuses for fighting alone. Or you can spread them evenly amongst your favorite characters, or you can just only put them on a character when you specifically want to equip a new skill and spend exactly that many points on them to let that be possible. Or you can do what I do, which I just evenly spread my points amongst every single character I currently own. And if I get a new character that's behind on points, I spend all the points on them until they get caught up. Even if I'm not even using them that much, just want to keep the options there so I can cycle through them and try out different strategies over the course of the game. There are also certain combinations of luminance skills that can completely break a character. There's a late game character that I have destroyed. He should not work this way. It's fucked up. I made a completely fucked up, broken character that just doesn't make any sense. What he can accomplish in a turn and what he does in general. But that's something to see in my playthrough later. I'm trying not to talk too much about any kind of late game spoilers and so on. But like, there's a lot of freedom in that system. But the problem with that is that the game doesn't know what level you are in any functional way. Because if they base the difficulty on your current level, that will be misleading and unreliable as an estimate of your power. And the issue with that being that in a lot of games like this, an enemy has a level that is visible, and then you can estimate how strong the enemy is based on the level above their head. I've played a lot of games that do have really interesting and weird difficulty curves, and a lot of them are built around that idea. Like I played Elex, which is the spiritual successor to games like Risen, I think, and Gothic, which I have not played either of those, but I've told that this particular part of it is relatively similar, which is that when you first launch into the game, everything in the game, in the entire game, is kicking your teeth in. You cannot handle most enemies, basically. And so it's like trying to like slowly untangle a really, really dense, messed up knot where you're like pulling on the different threads. Like, what can I even accomplish in this game? Where is some lame wolf that I can fight so that I can then start actually being able to do things? Like in Elex, at the beginning of the game, you literally can't hurt most enemies because the way that its defense calculation works, your damage literally is not high enough to harm people at all. It's not percentage based, it's flat. So you literally can't fight most enemies because they're too high level. And so it's like the game's built around that, though. Whether you like that or not, like you can get into the idea and like, okay, I got to figure out what I can functionally do in this game, and then I'll be coming back to all these other things and take out those things. But part of why the game can accomplish that is because it does have like traditional levels. So like there's a concept of how strong your character currently is. In Clair Obscur, your character doesn't really have any kind of relatively observable current power level in any reliable way, which means that you can't really run up to an enemy and reliably gauge how strong they are and how tough they are. This is made even tougher by the fact that the game is clearly signposting to you that it will be hard on purpose in the case of these side enemies that they've thrown at you so far. So I often think about like my issue with Dark Souls 1 is that they dump you in Firelink Shrine, and if you're lucky, the first thing you find is the Undead Burg, which is the intended path. But you might find the Catacombs first, and you might find New Londo Ruins first. In our case, I played the game with Andrew on launch. We found the Catacombs for a while, bashed our heads against it, had the infinitely respawning enemies, but we're also like, this game's supposed to be hard, though. It's Dark Souls. We've heard about that. So we didn't know that this wasn't the intended path. We just thought we had to figure it out. And there was some fun in trying to figure it out, but ultimately it was fruitless because it has infinitely respawning enemies, and you are level like 4 character and don't understand the combat or how to roll or anything yet. So then we pivoted and we found the New Londo Ruins underground. And for those that have played this game, they know that's even worse. It's full of ghosts that you can't even hit unless you have a special item that lets you you use a transient curse in order to be able to attack these enemies. And only when that buff is active can you attack the enemies. But the zone does give you that item. So for a bit, you can try to make progress into the zone. And once again, you're like, we must be supposed to go here because the other place was wrong, right? And it's only like after hours of playing this game and exhausting all of our options do we finally find the upper undead, or the whichever undead burg, and it's just got like regular ass zombie soldiers that die in like 2 hits, and they move really slow, and it's so clearly the first zone, but you don't know it exists at first, so you thought like, oh, I guess this is just the true Dark Souls experience begins here. And it was wrong, actually. No, you're supposed to just go in a different place, but the game wasn't really signposting well where to go. And because the game has a reasonable skill element, you can just go the wrong way for a pretty long time and not really know that that's not the intended play experience, basically. And so because you don't know what the intended play experience is, you'll just like go off and do the wrong thing for a while. There is a version of that in Clair Obscur, which is that it has this parry and dodging system. There's actually like a relatively massive skill element to the game where, much like the Souls games, you can functionally be invincible, basically, if you're just really, really cracked at the game. Like, famously, people do soul level 1 runs of Dark Souls games where you just never level up and you just like perfectly dodge or parry every incoming attack and just never get hit in the game, so you can just beat every boss even when you're really underpowered, and you'll die in 1 hit and you can't do that much damage, although people do find cracked, fucked up ways to do too much damage even without levels via all these weird risk reward systems in the game. And this game allows that, which is weird because it's a turn-based action game. So like normally if you're playing like Final Fantasy like 10 or something and you run into an enemy that's way too strong, they just fucking murder you immediately and you can't do anything about it because they just hit you. It's their turn and they hit you. This was my entire experience playing Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE, which is not a good game. But basically I would just like blitz through every dungeon, grab all the items I could, but I didn't want to do all the random encounters necessarily because I was doing a Let's Play and I'm just like, this is time consuming and annoying to do really repetitive fights. So I would just blitz through, get to the final boss of each dungeon, get obliterated by them instantly, and then I'd be like, well, guess I'm not high enough level. And then I would run around in circles and grind for 10 levels. And then I'd come back and fight the boss, and maybe it'd have a normal difficulty curve, or maybe I would obliterate them now because I'd overshot it. I'm like, shit, all right, I guess I'm above the intended level now. I wish the game would indicate in some way what the intended level was in that game, but that's a side topic. That's a game that could have told you what the intended level was for experiences, and it kept... And I was never there. I could never figure out how to be at it. So I never had a good experience with the combat. In this game, you can avoid all damage, I think, maybe in the entire game. Don't fight me on that one. I don't know, man. But I think you can. Because you can just parry incoming attacks. Like, even attacks that don't seem parryable, like earthquakes and shit, people will, like, do a pulsing attack on the ground that's a series of explosions coming out of the ground, and somehow you parry that with your weapon, I guess? Sure, whatever. I mean, I'd rather be able to parry everything, except for certain signposted attacks, than have the Dark Souls problem where they have a parry mechanic, but you can't tell when it'll work, and so you just get fucked over for trying to engage with that system. It's obviously better when Bloodborne and Sekiro made it so you could parry basically everything, and then Sekiro, obviously... This game actually takes... Clair Obscur takes after Sekiro a fair bit, which is that it has similar telegraphed alternate attacks that you can respond to in different ways, or have to in many cases. Like, you'll sit there and be parrying as a default against most attacks, but you also specifically need to like jump over certain attacks and so on. But you know, by and large, the idea is just that there's a button you can press to respond to every incoming threat successfully, and you'll be fine. But you have to do it perfectly, and it's very hard, which is compelling in its own right. But this opens up a huge problem with the difficulty of the game, which is that you can never tell when you're in over your head or when something's unreasonable outside of very specific niche cases, because everything feels like a dare. Everything feels like you should do it. You could do this. She's only got a few attack combos. It's hard. That's a 7-hit combo. That's a dick move. Like, you have to perfectly parry all 7 hits in a row in order to get the counterattack. But like, you could do it, right? You could do it. Look at him doing it. You just got to figure out what the timing of that is. And so every fight turns into this dare, like the chromatic enemy at the beginning of the game did, but in the open world where you could genuinely encounter fights way too early, just way too early. And that regularly happens, and it's very frustrating because in some of these cases, like I had an encounter where I spent 2 hours on a boss, and I'm like, the longer, like, the further in I got, the more I was like, this is a character flaw on my part. I get it. This is not the game's fault. I should have moved on at some point. But it's achievable. I'm seeing the health bar go down by a reasonable percentage. Like, it's low enough that I just did a little better. I could beat it. Like, I've been in a million Dark Souls and Bloodborne and whatnot scenarios where I had to lock in a situation like this where I was making appreciable progress, but just have to have one good run where I finally nail it. This game has a lot of bosses like that, but in this case, if I had proceeded through the story for 5 more minutes, I would have unlocked a new character, an ability that adds shields to my characters, and an entirely new mechanic that's an entire new resource and attack style that, like, if you know, you know, that all those 3 things happen at once. And it's like, why did you guys have this guy right outside? That's the most evil thing in the world. If you're going to introduce all this shit, if I just happen to go left instead of right in this open world, like, I would have loved to know about all these things. I thought we were done adding mechanics to the game. I was not necessarily assuming there'd be no more party members, but I thought I knew what the game was shaped like, at least, because I've been playing for like 10 or 20 hours. And so, like, there's an immense regret in moments like that, obviously. But that's not my biggest complaint. It's just like a thing that happens with the open world that can be weird about this stuff, and it can be a little frustrating in its own right. But my issue is that as I'm getting further and further into the story, none of the main story content is even remotely challenging. Like, I obliterate major bosses in like 2 turns. Like, I do 1 turn of attacks on them, they obliterate half their health bar, and then they kind of go into like an enraged second stage, sort of like something else thing where they're kind of going to whip out some attack they haven't seen before. And then I kill them before the thing even really gets to accomplish much of anything. And I'm left even wondering, like, was there more progression to this fight as I got further into it? Was there, like, surely they had like more moves and some kind of like growing threat. Like, there's really tightly designed, interesting fights in this game that really carefully build up a particular threat in a compelling way and raise the tension, at least in the earlier part of the game. And in this later part of the game, everything I fight just dies immediately, and so I don't really engage with it. And you would think the answer is just to raise the difficulty, right? Like, oh, you're a power game, or you're doing all the side content, so you got to raise the difficulty in order to fight this stuff and have a good experience, because this is the normal difficulty is made for babies that are just going to mainline the story and have never heard of side content, apparently, and for some reason don't play the games that they buy, and they just try to skip it. I guess. I don't know why people don't do side content unless it's bad. But then I can't raise the difficulty unless I'm going to be tweaking it constantly and having to like make up the difficulty curve on behalf of the game, and make my own fun, I guess, because 5 feet away from that story content is the most crushingly difficult nightmare content, and that never lets up. I'm so far in this game now. I think I'm like about to finish Act 2, and this game's kicking my ass. It's kicking my ass all the time. Just not ever when I'm playing the story. It's to the point where I'm like, okay, every time I sit down to play this game, I probably play like 6 hours of crushing side content that's kicking my ass all the time, and there's always another boss with another parry pattern that I have to nail or my characters die, and I just go into each fight assuming I'm going to die, and I'm just like, okay, let's just see what it's like, and then restart and see if I can react to it. And then I do the story right next to it, and it's fucking sleepwalking. I sleepwalk through all of it. All the main enemies die in a single turn. Not even a single party turn, a single character turn. One character in my party can wipe out every single enemy in a 3-enemy fight whenever the random encounters are happening. He just mows down the entire dungeon himself, and the other characters don't even get to take turns. That's how powerful I am, apparently. And the bosses die in like 1 or 2 turns, and I don't really get a sense of like what they were supposed to be doing. And what's really baffling to me is that this is a little bit of spoilers, but not in like a tangible like narrative way. It's just a word. But like there's specifically a stage of the game where you fight the Axons. They like, go fight the Axons next. And your characters are you have like an expert at this point. Like you have a character that like has knowledge of stuff, and he's like, I've never seen it. I could never beat an Axon. I've never defeated an Axon in all of my time. They're completely impossible to stand against. Like they're building up the Axons like they're the skinless Titan from Attack on Titan. Like it's going to be like a super nightmare, impossible milestone to pass. And then you get to the levels that the Axons are on, and the game to like actively tutorializes at you that like, yo, so you can go that way, and that's where the boss is. But you can go these other ways to do optional stuff. And like, you know, not only would doing that make you level up and get stronger to be able to better handle threats, but also you're going to weaken the boss by defeating these parts of the game. Like you doing these optional bits is going to make the boss weaker. And it's like, I don't need the boss to be weaker because the game's been easy whenever I'm in the story, and I know I'm in the story right now. But that's content, and I want to go play the content, right? And then so I'm just like, who is this for? Who is this designed for? One, like, you're tutorializing the concept of side content near the end of your game? Like, you really think that there's, like, players that are going to get this far and just not know the concept of doing other stuff to get stronger, and you didn't think to introduce that sooner? It's weird that they like all basically talk directly to the camera to explain this to you. It was to the point where I was like, there must be like a mechanical thing going on. Like I had to like look it up to be sure, because I couldn't tell if they were doing anything. I'm like, is this an Undertale thing? Is there a subversion happening where like, because like one or two of your characters kind of say a thing that almost makes them feel like, implies that they're feeling bad maybe when you weaken the boss by doing the side content. And it's like, wait, is this Undertale? Am I going to reach the boss, which you can't like talk to in advance to see what they're like or anything? Am I going to reach them and actually like, they're not an evil monster that I need to defeat, and I'm going to feel bad for like doing all this stuff to them in advance that I can't take back? Is what's going on here? No. It's an extremely straightforward, you do the stuff to weaken the boss before you fight the boss. And that's it. There's no narrative subversion, like, as far as I can tell. I haven't beaten the game yet, so I don't know if it goes somewhere in the long term, but as far as I can tell, these fights that seem to kind of signpost that maybe there's a reason not to fight all the side content, don't actually do anything with that, really, besides the fact that the boss might be stronger, and if you want that. But the act of doing the side content is stuff to do. Like, there's boss fights in there, there's zones to explore, there's unique loot and abilities and so on. Apparently my video we're staring at has ended. I'm just gonna rewind again. I've talked for longer than I thought I would, apparently. And it's like, but even if you're like, you're at this dilemma now where you're like, I want the real boss fight experience, but I also want to experience the level. And in some of these cases, like if you beat the boss, the optional stuff dies and you don't get to engage with it. And it's like, no, I just want to do the game. What's going on here? But like, it's very strange to me that these zones tutorialize the idea of optional content while being trivially easy, but also specifically the narrative hypes up the bosses as being like crushingly difficult. Like you have a character that you're supposed to respect, and he's like, these guys are fucked up. We cannot do this. But he's the same guy that's doing all the adventures with you where you're doing every tough fight everywhere. And all those random tough fights are comically harder than the Axons. And It's very strange. I'm just really in a space right now, especially with this part of the game, where I'm like, I don't understand what the intended experience of this game is. I don't understand what the expected difficulty curve is. I don't know what they think players are like and what they expect players to behave like. And I don't know how the average player acts either. So like, I don't know what your experience with this game was and how you played it. But in my experience has been that the game's really fucking weird. It's a really weird difficulty curve. It makes no sense to me, both as a game designer thing, like they have to go through. Like it's not satisfying to me when the main story is trivially easy. So I feel like I'm being punished for playing the rest of the game. But I don't want to. But I don't want to skip the rest of the game. It's right there. I can see it. Like they make it really easy to find because it's just giant dudes standing on a big map. That isn't that big to walk around on. So you see all these landmarks that are locations to check out. And like sometimes they kind of telegraph things, like there'll be a zone that just says danger when you're walking into it. But as far as I can tell, I don't think those are based on level. So I don't think the game is like it's not like the skull system a lot of games have where somebody's level will be a skull and I'm like, oh, that guy's way stronger than you. Don't fight that guy. You got to level up first to come back. I think those zones just say danger forever. So the implication is those are like harder side areas that they never tell you to go in explicitly. But also the danger doesn't indicate in any way whether or not it's actually dangerous. So you can't actually tell when to play those zones. But also those danger zones are not distinctly harder than the option, like the side bosses or optional-ish stuff that happens across the rest of the open world that isn't behind those flags, or even optional bosses that are in the main story dungeons. So you're genuinely like, I still don't really know what danger means with respect to the rest of the game and why it's uniquely signposted here, but not in other places. But I think the signpost also doesn't update based on how strong you currently are. So I also don't know what that means for where it should be and so on. It's just a very strange system. And it just feels dumb when the game overhypes certain bosses and all the characters make a big deal about those bosses and they have a million cutscenes surrounding those bosses. So it feels like those bosses are a big deal. But then the actual boss fight lasts 30 seconds in a game full of like crushing content. Like I don't know what the overall like per capita friggin' like average is of the enemies in this game, but I genuinely spend the majority of my time playing this game, I think, fighting tough bosses. Like, and not even like a huge, like there's a few that I've been stuck on for a while, but a number of them I'm like, yeah, I beat that boss in like 3 to 5 attempts, you know, which seems reasonable to me for a boss fight, of which the game has so many. And those are so regularly harder than the main story bosses. There is a snowy area that is full of like fire and ice that is aggressively, like the normal enemies in that zone are tougher than the Axons. And you're introduced to it like 10 to 20 hours sooner than the Axons. Like you have to pass by it. You go into a location that's like, check out that place, but don't go there. Actually, it's really fucked up. And then they're like, that's the way for the main story. Like they tutorialize it. That's the main story direction. That's the tough direction. But like that zone is actively harder than bosses that happen dozens of hours later. But also you can just do it. Like it's completely doable because of the parry system and all these other systems. Like you can tackle it. It's unsure when you should tackle it. This was a case where I came back later because it seemed like I'm like, I don't need to deal with this. But like you could do it. You can handle it. There's also an additional very strange system in this game, which is that when you hit 9999 damage, the game caps that, and you can't go any higher on your damage with any individual attack, which is a reference, I believe, to like Final Fantasy and stuff like that. Like I remember playing Final Fantasy X and hitting either 999 or 9999, like one of those. And I think you had to do like use like limit break attacks in order to be able to do more damage than that. But also like I think you got through like most of the game, and it was relatively rare to hit the actual damage cap with most of your attacks, at least when I played it, or maybe I was bad at it, I don't know. But in this game, there are so many pictos and things that increase your damage by like 50% in various conditions. And so you regularly will just like, oh yeah, I just doubled my attack that fight. Just like RNG causes me to do double damage because you can do like this Picto makes me do double damage, 50% more damage under this condition, and Roulette doubles my damage half the time, and also I crit. So those things combined all hit me to 9999. So relatively early in the game, shockingly early, you'll hit you'll crit a 9999 and be like, damn, okay. And those feel like impactful things at first. But I'm really far in the game now, and I'm really strong in a lot of ways. My average hits are basically 9999. I can't get stronger in many cases, to the point where the most valuable thing I can do is just increase my number of hits, and my stats otherwise don't matter as much. Because like what's been really weird is that you hit 9999 so early that and that ceiling stays in place for so long that I still don't know when it lifts, and I'm starting to worry it won't. But it feels so limiting because your characters can't get any stronger because of the 9999 cap, which means that like half your moves just kind of don't work properly, or like a lot of conditions that should make you stronger are just hard capped by the fact that they put a cap on how cool you can make your characters with your builds, which kind of feels punishing at some point, particularly that like, because like once I can't stress enough, I've been hitting that number for like 30 hours. Like I have had my damage capped for so long that at some point you're like, did I miss it? Is it optional? I'm doing so much optional content, but I can't figure out what thing makes the cap go away. Because surely the cap goes away. Because you've been stuck, you hit the number so easily that it just has to go away at some point. There's like, it's too much of a weird limit that psychologically the player would have issue with at some point, right? That they're hitting it constantly. So it begs the question of when you get to go past that number. And I'm sure it'll be satisfying when I finally do. There's also at least one boss that has just a frankly ludicrous amount of health. Like just, it's unreasonable. And so if you have to beat him doing 9999 damage cap per hit, you'd probably be fighting him for an hour. So like that can't be the intended experience. Even with a game that's being this much of a dick all the time, that can't be the intended experience, right? So I must be able to break that cap. That's the one boss in particular that I've specifically been like, no, I'm not dealing with this. I'm coming back whenever the fuck this cap gets lifted. And so I'm just trying to figure out how to lift this cap so I can just fight this boss finally. And that's just been waiting for dozens of hours. Like you have to remember that guy still exists dozens of hours after you fought him the first time, because where the fuck do you get to lift the cap? What's going on here? Just suffice to say, this game just has a lot of strange systems and experiences where I'm just like, I don't know what the intended experience is. I feel like the game teaches weird lessons if you just try to learn from it in a vacuum and how to play it, but also I think it also expects you to know what the genre is and brings some expectations in from that. And I think that if you have that experience, it also plays really weird and responds strangely to those particular incentives and player habits, and just gets very odd. And yeah, like for so much of the game, you just fight so many enemies that can basically one-shot you that you get numb to that. And so you don't really have a concept of like a difficulty curve, that there's any particular enemies that are, this is one's unreasonable and should come back. Like it really was for me just, oh, that one boss has 1 billion health. That's not happening. But aside from that, every single thing I'm like, yeah, like I could do this. It's not that different from the challenges before. And so it's just very strange to have two different games the whole time you're playing it. The unreasonably difficult thing that I'm nonetheless overcoming, and then the main story that does not in any way account for the idea that a player would ever do that, despite that being most of the content as far as I can tell. Like, why is that content everywhere if they don't want you to play it? Unless they just really specifically just value every player being able to sleepwalk through the game over the idea that these players would feel rewarded and engaged. Because like there's like two different extremes in gaming. One of them is like Fallout 3, and the other one is Fear and Hunger. And I like Fear and Hunger a lot, and Fallout 3 is just kind of boring. Because in Fallout 3, for so much of the game, like this is to borrow a point from H-Bomber Guy, basically, he brings up the fact that like in was it Fallout 3? It's Deus Ex Human Revolution, I guess. Like Deus Ex Human Revolution is a game that has you have hacking skills, and like, you know, it's like doing immersive sim stuff. So you need to do things in order to beat the story. But in many AAA type games that have these kinds of systems where you can build a character and have strengths and weaknesses, they very frequently make it so that the entire main path through the game is full of like computer terminals and lock picking spots that are just not very hard. Even when narratively they're supposed to be hard. Like even when it's the highest security big deal boys in the narrative, or even specifically a hacker's computer, the hacking on that computer will be low level because you need to be able to do it as a low level character and like low skill and other things like that. And they don't account for the idea that it breaks the story when you do that. And they don't account for the idea that like if you do invest in these skills, you're not going to feel that rewarded, because it's like, okay, your high level hacking skill is just a way of it's like a way of unlocking optional things throughout the game, but the entire main story, you'll never be tested on your main skill you've invested in. Like those kinds of situations suck. And then you have a game like Fear and Hunger, where it's like, it's just a fucking mad scramble. Like you have a goal, you're trying to reach it, but every part of the game is in conversation with that goal, and the goal feels unachievable. So everywhere you're trying to do, use every tool, learn every mystery, exploit every system, and figure out how to, in any way, get stronger and be able to overcome these things. It's like when the main path is hard, you're incentivized to go absolutely everywhere and figure out how to get more strong and find new tools and options to conquer that main path. And so then you feel rewarded when you beat the main path. But a lot of AAA design is about making the main story as easy as possible, and then filling the game with a bunch of optional stuff that makes people feel like they're being rewarded if they want a bunch of optional stuff that makes them feel like they're doing cool stuff there, but also makes them it also just lets them explore and feel like they're exploring. And I like exploring a lot, but I want to be rewarded. I want the experience to reward me for exploring and not make me feel like I'm playing the game wrong by engaging with it too much when I explore. So it's like, this is the short circuiting I've been having with this game, where I'm like, Clair Obscur is really neat in a lot of ways, but I'm so constantly confronted by how weird its difficulty curve is and how strange everything it's doing it is, that I'm like, what were they going for? I just regularly, I'm like, I don't get what this game is going for, and I constantly feel like I'm playing it wrong, even though I'm just playing it as hard as I can, basically. And like, I'm not grinding. That's the biggest thing, is like, I'm not going out of my way to like run around in circles and grind for the sake of grinding. In fact, I constantly skip fights. I often, in optional dungeons, run past all the optional fights because I don't feel like doing the same fight over and over again, and then I just grab all the loot and then fight the boss and then leave. So I'm doing less encounters than the game seemingly expects me to do, because you would think the game expects you to fight almost every enemy that's in your path, and I actively avoid that, and I'm still way too strong whenever I do anything that's actually mandatory. It's just weird. It's weird, and given that the game has such a strange non-linear way of leveling, you would think that they would fully embrace that and maybe just kind of not have you get actively stronger. Like maybe keep giving you more tools and options and so on, but maybe don't have you get exponentially stronger in a numerical way. Because if anything, the game that's having this much of a different approach to the genre, with its parry systems and its skill systems, and both player skill and the skills in the game, and its way of dealing with pictos and things, it feels like they could have avoided the usual problem of your character having a constant like rising power level and that being able to outstrip the content by having it be more about these kinds of options and interesting interactions. But they still recreated the same problem that much of the JRPG genre has, which is just wondering what the intended experience is, and like exactly what level you should be. I have this frequently with other JRPGs, in that I don't know what the correct amount of random encounters is to do before I do the final boss of each dungeon. So it's like, you'll, like I said before, like you'll enter a final boss in the one shot. And you're like, I guess I needed to be stronger, and then you'll get stronger, like, and then you'll beat the boss so easily that it wasn't interesting to fight. And I'm like, well, that didn't feel good either. But those games often have a more linear difficulty curve. It's just that it's relying on you interacting with its random encounters in a very arbitrarily correct way without signposting when you're doing it right or not, which is my frustration with that genre, because along with the fact that the random encounters themselves are repetitive, and I'm like, I've beaten this one before, I don't need to do it again. But in this game's case, it makes a lot of those things way more interesting to engage with, but it's like supercharged the difficulty curve, making no sense, because I'm simultaneously underpowered compared to most of the side content and overpowered compared to the main content, and I feel like I'm running out of game. So it's not like there's going to be like a point where I should have come back later necessarily. Like at some point, I don't think the gap ever closes between main content and side content. I think it's just never going to make sense, and that's disappointing. But anyway, no spoilers for like late act 2 and act 3 and so on in the comments. Like I get it. I'm not done with the game yet. I don't know how it ends. Looking forward to seeing the rest of it. The cutscenes and story stuff is really neat. And the combat is even frequently cool. I just wish that its overall structure made more sense. And I feel like this might be the bit where, like, I've heard that these are ex-Ubisoft employees, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. That matches with the weirdness of some of the games I've played by Ubisoft in the past, where I'm like, just a very strange approach to difficulty. The main difference is that those games usually never actually get hard. It's just noticeable that there's a path of least resistance through the main story in most mainstream AAA games, where they don't really want to ever block you from making progress. And so they try to make all the hard content as optional as possible. But then that means that you never feel rewarded for playing the hard optional content, because it doesn't actually come up and help you do stuff like in the main story and so on. It's just very strange things that I am not wrapping my head around, and I'm so many dozens of hours in that I just wanted to do a little rant about it. I'm going to go do something else now. See you guys later.